For those of you I haven't met, my name is McQuaid, and I want to talk to you and share a case study of some amazing work we've been doing at NAB using positive psychology to help develop female leaders. But as we begin this, I have a confession to make, and that is that as a child, my mother insisted on dressing me only ever in purple because she was determined that gender was not going to play a role in the future that I had, bless her. Now, luckily, my grandfather helped to normalise some of these early lessons for me because he taught me that it didn't matter how I looked, it didn't matter what colour I was wearing on any given day, or the fact that I was undeniably a girl. If something was important enough to me and I wanted to take my shot at it, then to get in there and to give it my very best. And that advice served me really well professionally. By the grand old age of 33, despite the barriers and the obstacles that many women face going through large organisations, I'd grown up to have a New York-based role where I was the global brand director for one of the world's largest firms. And I truly had it all in that moment. I had great career success, I had more money than I could spend, I had a beautiful family and friends, and I was in good health. So you can imagine my surprise about 6 months into that role when all of a sudden I started to struggle to find the energy to get out of bed each day. I couldn't figure what was wrong at first. And then as I started to think about it, I realised that finding the energy to keep up with having it all was exhausting mentally, it was exhausting emotionally, and it was exhausting physically for me. And I looked a little like this. This is me and my family. We're in London in this picture on one of my global work trips, and they come over with me. And if you look at my eyes in this picture, there's that little like rabbit in the headlights desperation of just kind of hanging on for dear life. And that's how life felt. On paper, it all looked great, but the reality was an incredible struggle. And what I realised as this journey continued to unfold, that actually there was a huge, huge difference between being well off and having well-being. And in that moment of realisation just like that, I didn't care about climbing those corporate ladders anymore. I realised that I had to try and figure out a way to feel happy wherever I was, whatever I was doing, and that wasn't going to come from my job description, and it wasn't going to come from climbing more of these corporate ladders. And so I did what many women did. My story is in no way unique. You can pick up a business section of a newspaper or a magazine on any given week, and you will find story after story of women facing similar challenge to the one I've described. In fact, last year in the Wall Street Journal, so many women are struggling in workplaces that they ran a huge feature titled, "What's Holding Women Back?" And it was based on research that McKinsey Institute had done around the world with more than 30,000 women at different roles, and they were finding some very common themes that we see in study after study. Many women, just like me, at some point in their career reach a point where they really just don't want to anymore chase the next role and the next role and the next role. So we see that generally at every stage of our careers, women are often less eager than men to become top executives. And despite the abundance of development programs and flexibility options to try and help us with this, many of us fear taking them in workplaces because we're worried that we'll be penalised in some way. And for those of us who move past that or never quite hit that moment and we're determined to get to the top no matter what it takes, we often really struggle as we face an uneven field due to gender bias, or because women generally cultivate networks of other women, which means we often lack the senior male sponsors that would really help us get ahead in the organisations. And although my husband, if he was here, would tell you this is certainly not true in our house, many women still struggle with inequality at home, which means managing that juggle between home and work eventually wears us down to that state of exhaustion of where I was. Now, the reality of all of this is that despite many really good efforts in lots of organisation by both men and women to help us through these issues today, in the UK, there are still more men named John who are leaders of company than there are women, period. And this is true in the US and Australia as well. In fact, in the US, the picture is even worse than that. The problem with this is that the evidence at this stage for the economic, The business, the social benefits of getting to gender equity in our workplaces is irrefutable. Again, McKinsey Institute estimate that if we had gender equity by 2025, we would have grown global GDP by 26%, which is the equivalent of combining China and America's economies today. We see in boards where there are more female directors that they significantly outperform other boards on numerous measures, including the return on equity, return on sales, and return on investment capital as well. Unfortunately, though, as Sheryl Sandberg was recently quoted in the Wall Street Journal, at our current rate of progress to trying to get to gender equity, it would take us more than 100 years based on how we're doing so far. In fact, I love this part of her quote. If NASA launched a person into space today, she could soar past Mars, travel all the way to Pluto, and return to Earth 10 times before women occupy half of the C-suite offices. And yes, we are that far away. So what do? How can we help women thrive at work? A lot of the conversation that we see in both media and workplaces around this issue is very much still focused on how do we fix the women? How do we fix the system? How do we make this better? And again, it's a well-intentioned question that people are asking. But we don't spend nearly as much time asking the question, when women are thriving at work, what is happening? And the reality is these examples can be found everywhere, and chances are you know a woman somewhere in your own world who's actually flourishing, not just functioning and getting by each day as she goes to work and as she turns up to life. We have plenty of examples on the global stage to draw from. Angela Merkel, of course, the German Chancellor, and Angela says, well, what makes it possible for her to flourish at work is that she never underestimated herself, and she never saw anything wrong with having ambition and going after it. In the business arena, of course, one of the most outspoken women in this sort of space is Sheryl Sandberg herself, and Sheryl believes it's important we don't let fear overwhelm our desire, to let the barriers we face, and there will be barriers, be more external and not so much internal, to deal with our own stuff that perhaps gets in the way from us being able to flourish more consistently at work. And of course, you can't talk about bright spots when it comes to women taking on the world without talking about Beyonce, of course. And Beyonce observes that we need to reshape our perception of how we see ourselves. We have to step up as women and take the lead. But about 4 years ago, I ran into a good friend at the swimming pool as we were taking our kids to swimming lessons over the summer holidays. And she said to me, Michelle, all this stuff on gender is great, but where's the roadmap for helping women do more of that? Where is the roadmap for helping women to flourish and to take the lead? And the reason that she was asking me this question was that she had been watching my journey in those years since I'd had that moment in my career of going, I'm no longer interested in climbing to the top, I just want to figure out how I flourish as I do this at any level. And that journey had taken me off to study my master's in applied positive psychology with the field's founder, Professor Martin Seligman. I'd taken everything that I could learn from what the science was discovering, experimented extensively on myself, but also on anybody in my teens who would stand long enough to try some of it as well. And I had reached a point when we'd moved back here to Australia where I truly felt like I was consistently flourishing at work in life, that I was feeling good and I was functioning effectively more days than not. My friend's name was Dale Stevens, and she was in a senior leadership role at NAB, and she got another wonderful colleague of hers who's here tonight, Nicole Devine, together, and they said to me, Michelle, we've got 300 women. What have you learned from your journey that we could take from that and teach to these women in technology at the bank and see if any of it worked for them as well? Now, that might seem like a big gamble on their part, right? What worked for me in an auditing firm isn't any guarantee it was going to work for women in technology in a bank. We had tested it a little further. I had a second sample of one, and that was my very best friend who'd also stood still long enough for me to practice on her, a wonderful woman named Megan Della Camina. And Megan at the time was the head of strategy and diversity at IBM here in Australia and New Zealand. So we had seen that some of this could work in a technology setting, and really, I think, in absence of having any other answers, we decided that we'd try to create a journey that combined all the things we'd been learning about in positive psychology with all the issues we knew that many women struggled with, but that those who were really shining had somehow mastered, and how did we give it to others? We had this group of 300 women, and initially we decided just for 1 year we'd see if any of this worked. And once a quarter, Megan and I would go in, we'd teach from the front of the room just like this, and we'd share some of the concepts of positive psychology. And in between, the women were asked to be part of smaller coaching groups. And these coaching groups were led by NAB women, more senior women that were in that group, who we had trained to be coaches in this area and really just hold the space for these women in between these teaching sessions to have some conversation, to share what was working and wasn't working, to be socially accountable for trying to make some of these changes for themselves. So what did we teach them on this roadmap? There were really 5 steps that we found were quite significant for them. The first was trying to teach them how to be a more authentic leader. And here we really drew into the research of Brené Brown, Professor Amy Cuddy at Harvard University, and we tried to help them understand that perhaps rather than showing up in their workplaces like men do and feeling that somehow they needed to be this third sex in order to be successful, that actually the feminine traits that women bring to the office are incredibly valuable. And we have seen in various studies over the last few years that actually when it comes to that combination of masculine and feminine traits in workplaces, regardless of the sex of the leader, whether you're a man or a woman, increasingly what people of all ages, cultures, backgrounds are telling us is they want more of those feminine traits. They want a bit more nurturing. They want more collaboration. They want some more compassion in their workplaces. And so in this first step, we're really trying to give the women the confidence to be who they are at their best, rather than feeling like in order to succeed in a workplace, you need to show up and be somebody else. To get them comfortable that actually when we show up in our most vulnerable state, just as who we are, no pretense, no mask, no bullshit, actually that's when we have the real power because we let other people connect to us in ways that build trust. The second step we took them on was trying to close the confidence gap. Whenever we offer sessions around closing the confidence gap for women, they are sold out and there is a waiting list. It never ceases to amaze me how many seemingly confident, capable, amazing women struggle actually inside to really feel as confident as they want to. Those mean girl voices we have chattering away in our head, telling us we're not good enough, saying things to us we'd never say to anybody else, but we think's okay for us, versus actually being able to discover our strengths, those things we're good at and enjoy doing, to practice more of a growth mindset, to not be so attached to the outcome of what success looks like, or doing it perfectly, or always being the good girl who gets it right and doesn't make a fuss, but to instead embrace some learning, to get comfortable with failure, to step out of our comfort zones and turn our thoughts into action so that we can stick our hand up and ask the question in the meeting, even if we're worried about looking stupid. So we can put an idea into action before it's perfectly formed, so that we can fail fast and learn from it and keep going. The other piece I love teaching women in here is the work of Dr. Kristen Neff around self-compassion. And I find her self-compassion work, how would we show ourselves that same kind of kindness and wisdom that we show almost anybody else, even a stranger on the street probably? How do we give that to ourselves? So instead of that mean girl voice beating us up and using self-criticism to try and motivate us, which neurologically over time actually has the opposite effect, how instead do we use self-compassion to activate our approach systems so we do build confidence, we maintain motivation over time, even when everything is not going perfectly. The third step we take them on is around building your personal brand. And I very much hope this is a photoshopped image and somebody has not done this to their baby. But personal brand is a fascinating conversation to have with women. We all agree that yes, we need a personal brand these days, but most women will tell me, yeah, but that's not relevant for me. I'm not trying to get ahead, so I don't need a personal brand. Or, you know, it feels a bit up myself, you know, I wouldn't feel comfortable kind of big noting myself and putting it out there. Or yeah, I teach my people that, but I don't need that at all. I'm past that stage. And of course, the reality with your personal brand is even if you are not building it, other people are for you all of the time, because your personal brand is your reputation. It's how people think of you and whether they think of you for roles and whether they take your words seriously when you put somebody else forward or you recommend an idea. And so in personal brand, we really try to break this apart. Number one, to connect it to what is their vision for their life. It's no good building a personal brand of success like I had done in that role in New York, only to realise it's taken you somewhere you didn't really want to be. So what do you actually want for your life? It's not often, as women or I think men in the busyness of every day, we really get the space to go, what do I actually want this life to be? And what's my purpose in that? For the sake of what? Am I willing to get out of my comfort zone and build the kind of personal brand for which I want to be known? What's the career plan I need to have around that? I don't need to map out every moment for the rest of my life, but what am I hoping for? What would be the next right roles for me to be stepping into? And then do I have the sponsors, the mentors, the network to support that? Sponsors and mentors are a fascinating conversation in organisations, and while many women these days in workplaces are being encouraged to have a mentor of some form, very few actually have sponsors. And at the end of the day, what the research is suggesting when it comes to women, not just being able to get the next role they want, but having more flexibility in their work, being able to get the study options they perhaps want as well, you need a sponsor to be able to make that happen. Very few of the things I was able to do in my career, including living in Melbourne while my company flew me back and forth to Philadelphia to do my master's, would have happened if I didn't have sponsors who were willing to back me up. So we put these pieces together for women in a way that is very practical, that anchors it in a way that feels of service, where they're not big noting themselves, it's not all about me, it's not just that scramble to the top, get me the big job and all of the money. For very few of them it is, but actually for most women it seems to be far more successful if we can tap into that place of purpose and service. What's the positive difference that we want to make in the world, and how does our personal brand make that easier to happen? And then we find women actually start taking these steps and investing the actions that are needed. The fourth step we take them on their journey is how do we help you create vibrant well-being? Because just like I was finding in that role in New York, it's easy to be doing all those first three steps and be completely exhausted as a result. So here we draw on research from people like Tom Rath around the basics of eating, moving, sleeping, mindfulness. But the truth is there's nothing in there that's rocket science. We all know what we should be doing in terms of our well-being. The reality is most of us struggle to make it work. So most importantly, as we teach these skills, we also teach them about how to use hope power instead of willpower to pull this off. Very few of us will make those changes on willpower alone, and I'm sure you've all had an experience with that already. So how do we tap into hope? How do we make these want-to goals that we're willing to go after because they're important to us, we want to own them? How do we have multiple pathways to get there? So one thing doesn't work, we already know that we've got some other options in play. And how do we create small daily habits around these changes so that they really stick? So it's not just something we're doing in those downtimes when we've got a bit of space to look after ourselves, but it's something that we're doing every day. And at the end of this step, we teach them one of my favourite things to teach women, which is how do we set boundaries around all of this. So instead of putting ourselves last and looking after everybody else and getting everything else done first, we leave some energy in the tank to actually look after us. And we get them practicing to say no nicely to all sorts of things, which again, many of us as women struggle to do because our brains are wired more with that hormone estrogen, which makes us want to please people, to fit in, to not create a fuss anywhere, and that makes saying no sometimes much harder for us. The final step we take them on this journey is how do you have the grit and grace to maintain it? When you're in this kind of training program, you're participating in coaching circles, it's not too hard to pull all of this off. But when you stop and reality sets in, how do you maintain that year in and year out so this really becomes a way of life? So in the last step, we share some of the new research from Professor Angela Duckworth from the University of Pennsylvania on how do you create grit. But I also love the work of one of my master's Masters of Positive Psychology colleagues, Coach Caroline Adams-Miller. And Caroline advocates that just having grit, that passion and perseverance for long-term goals really isn't enough. After all, we've all had moments of stupid grit where we've stuck at something for far longer than we should have. So what we try to help the women discover is how do you build authentic grit? And I love Caroline's definition of this, that authentic grit is the passionate pursuit of hard goals that cause you to emotionally flourish, to take positive risks, to live without regret, and to inspire others. And to me, this is the grace element that comes in there as well. How do we learn that stress in and of itself isn't a problem? Stress is simply our body's way of saying, wake up and pay attention. Something that's important to me here is on the line. And so learning that we don't always have to have that fight or flight response to stress, that cortisol kind of charge that many of us associate with it, but that there are other stress responses we can tap into around welcoming that challenge. Awesome, something important to me on the line. How do I respond to that in a constructive way? Or connection as well. Stress can just as easily trigger oxytocin, our connection hormone, as it does cortisol. So how do we trigger more of that oxytocin in our response to stress rather than feeling overwhelmed to it? So some beautiful research around that we share from Alia Crum at Stanford University and Dr. Kelly McGonigal around our stress responses and how do we learn to get comfortably uncomfortable rather than feeling like we're constantly sitting out at that edge and worried that we don't have a way back. For me, as I'd played with all of these things, what I found was it wasn't just that I was happier. I was, but I learned that that wasn't actually the main game. Instead, what I discovered out of all of these steps was I started to build the confidence that whether I was soaring through life and everything was going well, or whether I felt like I was about to crash through the bottom of it, I suddenly had the knowledge, the tools and support to navigate those moments, to really lean into them, to enjoy the good times, not be worried they were about to disappear right from underneath me, but to know that in the difficult times, I'd be okay, I'd come through those moments, and so I could lean in for the learning and the growth opportunities that they brought. So that's all great for me. How did we put it together for them? We left a postcard on your chair if you want this going out. We call this the Lead Like a Woman journey map. And you can see here each of the steps at the top that we've just talked to, the skills that we try to build and the researchers that we draw upon as we've been teaching these skills. But most importantly, and this was NAB's question after a year of this program, although we'd had amazing anecdotal feedback from participants in this program, was, well, is it really working? What's happening for more of the group, more of the time? So several years in, we repeated this program, same kind of cycle, and at the end of year 2, we brought in some independent researchers from Melbourne University, the wonderful Dr. Jackie Norrish and Diane Della-Broderick, and we got them to do some qualitative research with participants in the program to really understand what was happening. Now, NAB had done a very strategic thing. Not only had they had this Lead Like a Woman journey at the heart of the program, but they'd wrapped a number of other initiatives around community involvement with charities like Robo Girls, overseas study tours for some of the women to countries like India, where they could see how other women were working as well as advancing their technical skills. So the research is looking at all of the program, but in particular pulling out some of the heart of what we learnt about the Lead Like a Woman journey. And here's what they found. They found that the program had played a substantial role in encouraging and supporting women to take on new career opportunities, and that it had contributed to systemic and cultural change by shifting attitudes, particularly around gender diversity and workplace flexibility. In fact, in its first year, the program was viewed as so successful, it won the Chairman's Award at the Bank for Best Diversity Initiative right across NAB. At an individual level, when the women were asked what had they taken from it, there are a number of different outcomes that we were seeing them build in terms of skills and resilience. In particular, we saw those confidence levels coming up, which we'd known had been such a challenge, and the women were telling us that they now felt like they had the tools, the strategy and the support to deal with the uncertainties and the challenges that they were facing at work. And I loved one of the participants summed it up like this. She said, "It's had a significantly profound effect on me as a human being and as a leader." And I have to tell you, it's some of the best work to get out of bed each day and do when you get to walk in with a group of women and start sharing some of these skills. So for me, where did it leave me on my journey? Well, I'm no longer dressed in purple is the good news. Very rarely anyway, only when I choose to versus my mother. I still throw myself at the things that matter to me most and give it my best shot, regardless of whether my gender might be a plus or a negative in those situations. Talked about the fact that for me there's that true sense of confidence that no matter what work or life brings, I can show up and be present in it and know I'll navigate my way out the other side of it. Perhaps my biggest aha though at a systems level is that I truly believe that when it comes to reaching gender equality in workplaces, we're asking still the wrong question largely, which is how do we fix what's not working, instead of asking of all the things we are doing, what is right and how do we build on it. So I offer the NAB case study and the Lead Like a Woman journey as one example of ways that we are building on what's working on women, that we're tapping in to the strengths that they have and showing them ways that they can do more of that and have some social support and system support around them as they do that. So if you're looking for more, head over to leadlikeawoman.net. There is lots up there. And in fact, we have an individual version of the program that you can buy if you want to go through it yourself. It's online. There's a book and coaching calls and all sorts of things that come with it. And we've done a special offer for Collective Insights. So if you head up there before Sunday night, you can get $100 off the program. Just at checkout, put in the word Collective Insights or one word, and it will give you a discount, and hopefully it will help you also lead like a woman. Thank you so much.